Hi, my name's David Schroeder, and the purpose of this talk is to actually introduce you to the idea of what obesity surgery is all about. And I will get round to telling you about the surgery, but first we actually need to discuss why do people struggle with their weight. Then we'll talk about the surgery, and then we'll talk about why we have some extra processes associated with the surgery to help you get the best results from it. The interesting question that I always start off asking people is, do you know why you struggle with your weight and I don't? And I get lots of responses. I get metabolism, genetics, I don't exercise much, I eat too much, I'm using food for comfort. Those are the common things. But underlying it all, there is a major difference between people that are struggling with their weight and me. The truth is, I don't struggle with my weight because there's no pressure on me to make me eat. I have no great joy from food. My patients, on the other hand, have an incredible joy from food, and the pressure on them to eat is 100 times more than I have. I think a lot of us, thin medical professionals, have no understanding of this. That's pretty normal. We're all living life from within our own brains, and so our experience of what is actually happening is there's a natural assumption that that's what everybody feels, isn't it? But the reality is we're all on a spectrum to the degree to which food is nagging at our brain, calling to us and making us eat. From me down here with very little pressure, and the 200 kilogram patient up here who is just fighting it the whole time and still can't win. Even though we've actually said that genetics do matter, metabolism does matter, I think there is an underlying thing in the brain that actually creates the original problem. That original problem then develops into the metabolic problem, and once you've got the metabolic problem, then we are fighting a very strong, powerful urge to preserve weight. Have a look at this picture of the brain here. This green dot in the center represents the pleasure center. There is a medical term for it. It's the nucleus accumbens. It's the reward center in the brain. And if you say, what's it there for? I think the idea probably was that it was meant to give you a reward when you did something that had an evolutionary advantage. It was actually, therefore, invented before alcohol, drugs, and smoking came along. Whenever it's stimulated by whatever does it for you, and let me stress that, only for you. You can't make anything do something for somebody. That's what taste is all about. That's why some of us like broccoli and some of us like chocolate, and why some of us like cars and some of us like shopping. When it's stimulated, though, it causes the release of chemicals in the brain, endorphins, serotonin, and these feed back on the brain and say, that was good, I should do that again. The trouble is, though, that you can get an over-the-top response, and if you get an over-the-top response, you can get to a point where whatever you're really enjoying starts to affect your health. And you think, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. And then you try to stop it, and you find you can't because you get cravings. The pressure is too great, and you even get to the point of doing it in secret because you're embarrassed about it. Now, the point of all that is we've just defined addiction. I think everybody accepts that you can be addicted to cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, and this part of the brain does light up when we scan brains and expose addicts to those particular substances. But towards the end of last century, for the first time, we were able to show that the same part of the brain lights up for substances that break down rapidly to glucose in people that are struggling with their weight. And so we now have pretty good evidence that we are dealing with an addiction to carbohydrates that are rapidly broken down. That's been my experience too. No one comes along and says, look, I've got a real problem. I'm addicted to steak and salad. It's always either the savoury things, the scones, the chips, the bread, or the sweet things, the cake, the lollies, the chocolate. And unfortunately, sometimes it's both. Have another look at this picture of the brain. We've added in another centre at the front, the red centre. This red centre is the part of the brain involved with control. It's the bit that says, I should not do this because it's socially unacceptable, it's dangerous, it's not in my best interests. That's the bit that when you're looking at the cake says, no, you shouldn't eat that. You don't want to actually get overweight. Your diabetes is going to play up, so don't do it. The trouble is, that's the angel on this shoulder, and the devil on the other shoulder is that pleasure center saying, oh, that looks good. You deserve that. It's been a hard day, and you can start the diet tomorrow anyway. So, this control center, again, is variable depending on people's genetics and probably also how they were brought up. So, the control center is the bit that should be keeping things under control, but we, again, on brain scans can show that in people that are very large, the control center in respect to food is tiny. And that means that you can't actually say no to what's in front of you. It's missing. Now, when you do a diet, you try to activate that center, but it's almost as if we're given a certain amount of ego strength each day. Now, you can pour all your ego strength into working with that center to do a diet, total effort, very hard to do anything else, and suddenly the people around you become very irritating. The trouble is, though, that as soon as something else requires you to take away some of your ego strength and utilize it to deal with a troublesome spouse or an illness or a child that's playing up, suddenly there's nothing left to actually fight the food, and that's when we fall off the diet. Interestingly, we don't know whether that will improve after the operation, and being aware that there isn't a good control center, we don't rely on it. We say, don't put yourself in the situation. If you were a recovering alcoholic, you wouldn't actually say, well, I'm going to keep some bottles of alcohol around the house in case my friends come around. If you're a recovering person who's had obesity surgery, we don't expect you to have cakes and biscuits around the house available for your friends. So the net result of this very strong pleasure center and very small control center is that you are fighting a battle that is incredibly hard to win. Now we're going to add in the metabolic side. There is a time where you can just be overweight and still be perfectly healthy. But at some point, probably associated with inflammation, you suddenly get to a point when you get something called insulin resistance. Now, insulin resistance usually is an acquired thing, but it can be present from birth, particularly if your mother had gestational diabetes. My fat cells do what they're meant to do. I eat my food, the food gets absorbed into the bloodstream, and my fat cells take it up. And then 2 hours later, when all the food's gone, my fat cells reduce in size, they let that energy go out, and if I starve, I lose weight from my fat. Patients who have got insulin resistance, however, are very good at taking the food up, but when they go to release it, it's like there's a blockage there. And so the food's gone from the gut, there's nothing left there in the circulation, and the brain's saying, hey, fat cells, where's my food? And the fat cells are saying, but we can't get it out to you, it's stuck. The brain is then going to say, well, in that case, I'm going to make you eat again because I need some energy. It's also going to demotivate you to exercise. It's going to say to the muscles, if there's no energy for me, don't you dare think about going and doing any exercise. And that is why we feel hungry and tired 2 hours after a big meal. So what's going on there? We think the blockage is actually due to the insulin. Now, my insulin levels normally are very low. When I have my meal, the sugar goes up, and so the insulin shoots up, and its job is to push the sugar into the fat cells, the muscle cells, and the liver. When it's doing that, it's saying to the fat cells, hey, we're in storage mode, you don't actually need to release any more energy out, just wait there and we will leave soon and then you can start releasing. And so my insulin goes down and we go back to the release mode. But people with insulin resistance have got something wrong with the receptors on the fat cell. And as a result, it means that they've got much higher levels of insulin to do the same job. So instead of having very low levels, the levels are much higher. And then when food goes on top of that, there's an even greater peak in insulin levels. That means that the message of don't release, we're in storage mode never goes away. So if those people starve, they don't actually lose weight from their fat in the first 24 hours, they actually lose it from their muscles and from the liver. So of course, what is going to put the insulin up high in the first place is going to be things that break down to sugar rapidly. Does that sound familiar? Isn't that the same thing we said stimulated the pleasure center in the brain? So we've now got the addiction to food, we've got the metabolic element. If you have got both of those going on, then you are literally stuffed. We then get to a point of saying, I don't like this, I'm going to do a diet. And then our bodies are really fighting against us because our bodies constantly have feedback from our fat mass to the brain saying, you've got just enough fat. As soon as you start trying to lose fat, the fat mass tells the brain, there's a famine going on. We've got to actually eat. And you become incredibly hungry and you can fight it, but eventually you will re-eat. And most of my patients find that they go back to an even greater weight. And that is what we call the yo-yo dieting. That is the dilemma that we're in, and there does not seem to be any easy way out with drugs or with just psychology alone. And a number of my patients are actually psychologists who know what they should do, and they can't do it. Drives them mad. This is where the surgery fits in. The other important thing is these chemicals that are being released, the endorphins and the serotonin. Endorphins are your brain's built-in morphine. Now, your subconscious brain knows if you've got chronic physical pain or chronic emotional pain, it can soothe that pain by releasing those chemicals. So in that situation, you can self-medicate with whatever does it for you to actually make yourself feel better. That's a marvelous gift, and you've got to realize that when you ask me to take away your ability to eat, you're also saying to me, take away my ability to self-medicate the problems in my life with food. Think on that very carefully before you progress to the surgery. So prior to the surgery, we're in this situation. There's a huge subconscious pressure saying, eat, eat, eat. And there's that little control center saying, but I don't like the result. We then get into a situation of not wanting to be mobile, staying at home because we don't feel like being social because we're embarrassed. We therefore sit at home, get depressed, and to make up for that, we end up eating to raise the endorphins in the brain. That becomes a vicious cycle. We get bigger and bigger, less and less mobile, more and more depressed, and it's almost impossible to break out of. The thing about surgery is, even though we're operating on the stomach, we actually have an effect on the brain. And after the operation, all 3 operations actually take back the power of that eat thing and seem to make it much more balanced and make it possible for people to actually do the changes in their life and eat the diet that their body needs, which is obviously a diet that is almost lacking completely in food that breaks down rapidly to glucose. And when that happens, you are then able to let your fat cells release and you can lose weight and you seem to be able to keep it off. And that is the important thing of surgery. So the way that we measure obesity is a pretty rough measure, but we simply take your weight in kilograms and divide it by your height in meters squared, and that gives us a measure called the body mass index. Obviously, it could be led astray by someone who has an enormous amount of muscle, and it's been said quite often that the front row of the All Blacks would all be obese by this definition. They are the extreme. It's usually a reasonable measure, though, for the average person on the street. So that body mass index means that we can artificially divide people up, and you'll see in this picture that normal has been defined as a body mass index of 20 to 25, overweight is 25 to 30, 30 to 35 is obese, 35 plus becomes morbidly obese. The medical problems associated with obesity are manyfold, as you can see on this picture here. The common ones that we are really worried about, and the whole country is worried about, is the type 2 diabetes, but there is also the problems with sleep, with arthritis, with high blood pressure, with heart disease, with infertility, and increased rates of cancer, as well as the myriad social side effects. Obesity seems to be one of the last places where people feel that it's okay to show prejudice, and a lot of my patients have had horrible experiences with total strangers being incredibly rude to them. Because of that, a lot of them don't want to go out and experience significant social isolation.